Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel where we're trying to find a better answer than we have so far to can we fix vulnerability reporting in open source? My name is Eric Tooley. I'm a hubber. I look after supply chain security as a product marketer. I'm here with a panel of GitHub colleagues and some industry experts who've been dealing with the pain of this issue for a while. And by the end of it, we'll have some new answers and some new information, and we'll also have a chance for you to ask questions of the panel so we can figure out where to go from here and how to move forward here. So first on our panel, I'd like to introduce Hawa Otori.
Thanks, Eric. First of all, let me just say I'm so excited to be with you all today. My name is Hawa Otori. I am a staff researcher at the GitHub Security Lab, where I lead our socio-technical research and really explore the relationships between developer and security research communities, starting with the vulnerability disclosure process. Beyond GitHub, I am a freelance journalist, an independent audio producer, and the host of the Building Black podcast. Paulino?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thanks for the invite. I'm Paulino Calderon. I come from Cozumel, Mexico. I'm a security researcher, and I'm also an open source contributor and maintainer. And I've been reporting security vulnerabilities for the last 15 to 20 years.
Hey everyone, I'm Kate Catlin. I'm the senior product manager with the advisory database team. So we work on not necessarily Dependabot itself, but the database that powers Dependabot, like whether or not this gets into it and how it's curated, et cetera.
Hi folks, I'm Sam. I'm a staff engineer at Slack working on their desktop team. My day job is a maintainer of the Electron project, where I'm currently the chair of the security working group, so that's my interest in this.
Hi everyone, my name is Madison Oliver. Try that again.
Run it back.
Yeah. My name is Madison Oliver. I manage our advisory database curation team here at GitHub. I've built my career around vulnerability reporting, vulnerability disclosure, and vulnerability coordination specifically, which is why I'm here on this panel today.
All right. Thank you, panelists. And I want to kick it off with a question to you, Paulino. You've been doing security research for a while, more than a decade. You probably have a story or two about how this process has maybe not gone according to plan.
Yeah, well, it's been a long time since I started about 15 years ago. We were more worried about, being sued. So that has changed for good. But still, there's a lot of room for improvement. I think most of the time, you end up giving up because of the lack of response from the vendor. And overall, most of the time, one of the major issues that I have reporting vulnerabilities will be that you get ghosted, right? So after investing time on finding the right contact, setting up the proof of concept code, setting up the environment to run it, and then you report the vulnerability, you have to pester them, put it in your schedule, remember to remind yourself to ask them what's the deal with the disclosure process or where they're at. It has happened to me with a lot of the major vendors in the industry. I know sometimes it's because of my lack of proof of concept code, maybe the reporting could be. But you have to understand that as a security researcher, you have limited time to invest on doing this for free, pretty much. If you're not, the reason I do it is because I want the vulnerability to get fixed. So I'm not really that interested on the bounty itself, although it's nice, but it's not my main motivation. Yeah, most of the time, my worst story, I guess, is when I reported a vulnerability, I know it was vulnerable, I showed some proof of concept code, they told me it didn't meet the security bug bar, so it wasn't gonna get fixed. I released a tool to generate malicious macros in iOS, so I was able to escape the application sandbox using certain techniques, certain functions that could be abused, and I was told that it wasn't gonna get fixed. I went back to it a few months later, reinstalled Office on my computer, and when I tried it, it just didn't work anymore. So I was surprised that it got patched silently. I sent them an email, and they was like, well, we released some in-depth hardening techniques that may or may not have solved the issue that you reported a few months ago.
Oh.
So.
All right, so Sam, as the maintainer, you've got a different side to the story, right? Do you ghost these things? I mean, how do you even know?
It's never deliberate, right? A lot of it is like communication problems. Like on one side it's ghosting, on the other side it's sometimes the communication comes through the wrong venue. Like we've had lots of reports come through from like Twitter, and like that's never really where you want to receive a security report, because you wake up and you see like trending your project, and it's like
Hashtag.
there's never really a good reason for that. So like it's coming through the wrong avenue. It's like obviously some reporters are like going for bounties because it's like their day job. So sometimes the reports come through other programs, and then you end up with this like communication barrier because like someone reports it to a bug bounty program at a company, and then it ends up at the open source project, and you're like communicating like through another company to the researcher, and this whole communication barrier is like just slow and bad, and it's hard to give updates even if we wanted to.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the reasons why I'm really happy that you're on the panel, How, is that part of your research focus has been the different attitudes between maintainers and security researchers. So, what have you learned in your research?
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that we had a chance to hear from both Paulino and Sam, and I'm glad that Sam touched on the communication. So both of your stories are really what we've heard from both open source maintainers and researchers. So when we started our project, what we really wanted to understand was how can we improve communication within the vulnerability disclosure process between both of these communities, right? So we learned a couple of things coming out of that work. Number one, the quality of communication really depends on the quality of the relationship, right? So what we learned from maintainers and researchers is that outside of the disclosure process, they're not really interacting, right? They have limited to no interactions with each other outside of this process. So really their relationship is based on perceptions. And so what I mean by that is not necessarily how one group is perceiving the other, but really in terms of how one group believes the other person is perceiving them, right? So for instance, Paulino mentioned, hey, I'm being ghosted. Sam is saying, hey, it's a communication issue. And that's really what we learned from the interviews and the conversations we had with both groups, right? So one maintainer said, hey, I think researchers really see us as lazy or not trying to address the issue, when really it's a resource issue. I don't have the ability, I don't have the time, I don't have the understanding necessarily, but I want to do something about this. But that's not really how the researcher is receiving them. And on the other side, researchers said, hey, we think maintainers are looking at us as simply trying to blow up our projects and just kind of cause trouble, right? Which, regardless of, those intentions and not necessarily being based in truth, that really sets the tone for the relationship when they engage in the process. And outside of that, they said, hey, when we do get into this disclosure process and we are communicating, both groups said we do prefer to do this privately, right? So what was top of the wish list was, hey, we want private vulnerability reporting on GitHub to be able to do this in a more efficient, collaborative way. So that's really what we learned coming out of that research project.
That is a perfect segue to Kate Catlin, our product manager, because just this week here at Universe, we've launched this new capability for the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I showed up at GitHub about a year ago, and How's research was the first thing anybody sent me. So very early in the process, I started to learn about this kind of explosion point where like security researchers and maintainers just try to talk to each other, and it all goes wrong. And so when we were building a feature to address this, we distilled it down to 3 problems, which was it's got to be direct, it's got to be private, it's got to happen behind closed doors, and it has to be ongoing so that the security researcher knows what the status is beyond one first response email. And we brought it all together with an awesome new feature called private vulnerability reporting. So now if you are the maintainer of an open source repository, you can go to your settings, you can go to code security and analysis and enable this process for security researchers to directly file a report to you with all of the information in it. And then you can continue to comment and discuss in that secret private environment.
So we all have experience in trying to communicate across organizations and between different functions, and there can often be friction because what might be urgent to me might be at the bottom of your priority list. Mm-hmm. So how are we making the communication channel easier for people to get on the same page, to establish a best practice for determining is this worth addressing and how?
I think the way we're making it easier is by making it direct. A lot of times that disclosure right now, if you can't find an email, it's like on Twitter or on Reddit, or the most hilarious one I heard about was on Steam Discussion, which is a video game website. And so by having that form right on the page, like, no, put it here. It's so easy. That really cuts a lot of it out. And then by keeping that reporter involved, you can continue to comment and chat with each other that way.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And this is a new thing. You can't do this type of process unless the maintainer has enabled private vulnerability reporting on their repo. And so a lot of our old habits, well, they need to change. And if we have best practices, I know, Madison, that's been one of your focuses. Now we've got new options.
Mm-hmm. So I'm involved in the Open Software Security Foundation and their vulnerability disclosure working group. And we've recently released a guide for reporters and finders specifically of vulnerabilities and best practices for them and how to report these to maintainers. So now that this feature is released, I'm hoping that we can add this as a potential recommendation if you're reporting to a package or a project that is hosted on GitHub, that this is a way that you can give this information to maintainers. They also have a guide for maintainers as well for receiving vulnerability reports and responding to them and how to handle them. There are a number of best practices for both sides of the disclosure.
Now, we haven't talked about bug bounties or any type of way to kind of commercialize this. Is that a deliberate decision on GitHub's part? I guess this is for Kate.
So we're launching this feature as a public beta. We know it's not perfect right now. We think it's a really good start. Like we've managed the MVP here of like this is a value add as it is. But we need your feedback to continue building this together. Right now, there is no finances involved in any of this. It's only on open source. It's only free. We're leaving the door open for the future. We want to hear from our users. We want to evolve this in tandem with our users. So we'll see what we're saying a year from now.
Okay. So I'll just put you on the spot, Sam. Have you enabled a repo for private vulnerability reporting?
Yeah, the entire Electron org has the feature enabled now. So in theory, we can dispose of our security at email address, which will make me very happy. No one likes checking their email. So I look forward. Well, I say look forward to, but maybe we change that. It'll be a better experience when it comes through GitHub security vulnerability reporting than having to check that email constantly. So I look forward to the first time that happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe you'll hear from Polino. I mean, he knows you're looking forward to it.
I look for that as well, but I think one of the issues that we need to remember is that one of the major problems is that the vendor holds all the power. So they decide if it's an issue or not, what the criticality level is, if they're going to do something about it or not. So I think you address the first issue of having the security researchers not look for the point of contact. But then once that communication is established, what do you have in mind for the future in terms of maybe arbitrage or something around that?
Yeah,
Taking away the power from the vendor and make it, if you don't agree with them, because sometimes they're not correct, you could maybe bring a third party which is neutral and make a case for it.
So the good news is that if folks like Electron are opting into this feature, they're sort of making a statement of, we care about this, we want to hear from you, we don't want to ghost you. Like it's sort of just, by enabling the feature at all, you've taken a step in the right direction and sent that message to the community. If you're not getting a response, you still do have some power in your hands, because since you're still on the advisory after the submission, you can comment. You can comment. We don't have a Facebook poke button or anything, but you can add more information, et cetera. In terms of arbitrage, I know that's a fantastic service that other folks offer. Again, not starting with that. We are completely neutral. We are uninvolved with arbitrating at this point. But again, it's a new feature. We'll see where things go.
Awesome. When it comes to the process and all of the data that a security researcher has to submit, there are certain standards of the description of the problem and the metadata that one attaches to it. From a maintainer's point of view, how valuable is that to have a full description?
Honestly, the more, given that you now fill out that GHSA form, the more of that that's filled out, it's way easier for us to deal with. If the report comes through and is here is the problem, and there's no reproduction, not even the versions that are impacted, it's really hard for us because we start playing whack-a-mole and guessing which version they might be dealing with. We've definitely looked at a screenshot they've sent before and guessed what version it was based on the screenshot they sent. And given that it's like a structured form, that's really going to hopefully improve the quality of the reports we're getting as well. Like, and you don't have to fill out everything, which is like a deliberately good choice, because like you should prioritize getting the report in quickly and then like adding the information later. But as Kate said, like they're still involved. They can add that information after the fact. They can comment on it. And so like it improves the speed and hopefully improves the quality, which looking forward to.
Kate, why does it matter that this is within GitHub? Why can't it be some external service or a third-party tool?
Because GitHub is where you resolve it. And so that's where all of our developers are already working every single day. They're in there. That's where the code is. That's where they're going to fix the problem. So by keeping it all in one place, that means you don't have to check 20 different platforms. You're not like, oh, one browser open here, another browser here. It's all there. It's all in the same place. And the goal there is like, let's resolve this faster. Let's resolve this with more accuracy.
Perfect. We've got a number of people here live in the room, and we've got plenty of time for Q&A with our panel. So keep in mind if there's a question that you have for anybody here, in a few minutes, we'll go ahead and open up Q&A. But next off, since this is a new thing, it's in GitHub, it's in public beta, does that mean that it's not finished? How do we provide feedback for something like this?
We want your feedback so much. So go ahead and enable it right now. And then you can head to github.com/community/discussions and post any feedback there. You can also just tweet at me. My Twitter handle is @KateCatlin. I might regret this. But we'll follow up. And a lot of times what I love to do is just get users on the phone and spend 30 minutes talking to you. So by all means, please send us all your feedback. We love it. It's all loved.
Yeah, you've interviewed 1 or 2 users already in this process.
1 or 2 are like 75. Who's counting? But yeah, we've done quite a lot of interviewing over the last year.
That's great. Yeah,
and building off of how many more security researchers Hawa has talked to as well.
Yeah.
Right. It's a great example of how the community intelligence and experience can contribute to a solution that actually is in service of the community. Because ultimately, we're looking for the win-win outcome here. What makes it an easier, more trustworthy process, both for the reporter and the maintainer, there's really no reason not to do it this way. Is there a reason not to do it this way? Why wouldn't this be a best practice? Madison, I mean, can you think of a scenario?
Just if you're not on the platform. If you're using GitHub as a researcher, as a maintainer, as any sort of community user, you're already there. The goal of this particular feature release was to make this as easy as possible. If we lower the barrier to entry to reporting the vulnerability to the folks that really need to fix it, to the folks that need this level of information, which isn't always necessarily the security team itself, but the developers that actually are fixing this, if we can make it as easy as possible to get them that information, it increases the likelihood and the incentives for researchers to do that. So we're working on making vulnerabilities as transparent as possible to those that need to know about them.
That's great. Okay, so let's move on to Q&A. I imagine that anybody who's here in this room has had some experience on one end or the other of this process. And if you have a relatable story or a suggestion or something, then we would love to hear from you, and everyone can learn from this. So we've got a mic that we can pass around. We have a mic that we can pass around. Surprise, we're doing this early. So so please raise your hand right here in the middle.
So thank you. I think I live in this world. I'm Shankar Desai. I work for Caterpillar. I have responsibility for DevSecOps and Power Platform, a bunch of other stuff. I think one thing what you can think about, Kate, I think this is a great step forward, is when we hear the stories, it's about trust. And you have to focus on this platform, how to build that trust. Maybe there is, in bug bounty, it is happening a little bit. Like if there is a certain person who says, yep, there is a problem, you focus on it faster because they have 9 out of 10 times in the past, their issues have been really, the ones which you really need to hit. Because when you're trying to deal with thousands or millions of vulnerabilities, the challenge we have with the developer community, which one I need to focus first. It's not about whether I have focus on it, whether it is important or not, but I have so many of them. Yeah, so how do I focus? So I'm hoping when this platform, when you kind of build it, is let's just say, I think you said Paolo, right? Paolo? Yeah. So let's just say Paolo reports 10 of them. and developer community kind of latches on to that, saying, hey, this is important. So kind of Paolo's talks kind of rises in there, and they go, next time Paolo reports the 11th one, people are going to start paying attention because this. So I'm not trying to make it more competitive, but I'm trying to envision to say this will help in prioritizing stuff, because my whole life, not whole life, just like last few years, it's about how do I give right guidance to the community, saying this one is more important than this one, and we rely on multiple sources, as you can imagine, and so hopefully this platform would be one of those sources to be able to do that. So.
First of all, love that we're getting feedback already. See what he did there? Keep it coming. So that's great. Yeah, I love that idea of sort of like, we have credits in our system. Like, how many credits does the researcher have to their name? I might toss this ball over to Hawa. Hawa, do you have any other thoughts coming to mind of ways we could also build trust between the security researchers and the maintainers?
Honestly, I think from the research that, just speaking with both groups, I think in terms of building that trust will have to happen outside of the process, right? So one of the things that, as I mentioned at the top, was, hey, we don't interact outside of this process. And maintainers said, hey, when I receive an initial report, right, the first thing I'm feeling is stress and anxiety, right? So I think figuring out spaces outside of the disclosure process, which can be a stressful situation for both parties involved, I think will ultimately continue to sort of foster that trust, right, and collaboration. So when we do get into the process, it could be a little bit more smoother for both parties.
Let me revisit that. I don't think he's aware that there are batches for the number. Once, I think Jonathan has a few of them. Once you report a vulnerability as a security researcher, you start building a reputation through batches. Credit, yeah.
Yeah. How many advisories you've been credited on?
So if you have a good number there, you already have some decent reputation. So
Yeah.
it's working out.
We could do more to display it, though. I think that's an interesting idea.
Surfing it in the reporting UI or something. It would be
Yeah.
good.
Where would you want to see it as a maintainer? What's their spot?
On the triage list, on the incoming reports where it says the person, just some,
Stars.
just 4.5 stars out of 5. But somewhere there, some kind of indicator that's just this person has reported a lot and they're all really good. Put them at the top of the list.
Yeah, maybe we need a feedback form, like on a Lyft ride or something. Clean car, careful driver. Yeah, we have another question here.
Yeah, so I don't know, a few months, 6 months ago, I reported a bug in NPM. The NPM CLI ended up basically shipping environment variables to the package registry when you were using workspaces. In that, I supported it through I think HackerOne or whatever the bug bounty system GitHub uses is, and I was getting pings of hey, cool, we're working on this, and then just nothing. And then I got another ping of hey, we're still working on this, nothing. So part of what I'm interested in is, because you're kind of merging the reporting and the code, and there's the private fork stuff. Is there a good integration there, in being able to see oh, they're actually doing something about this rather than just absolute comms silence?
Yeah, that's actually built into the feature. So since you're still involved in the draft security advisory as a reporter, you can write the temporary private fork if you want to. They can kick you, maintainers, you can kick them out if you don't want them to. But you can fix it the whole thing if you want. The other thing you can do is just watch and see what changes they are making in that temporary private fork. And so you're keeping track of the status along the way that whole time.
All right, over here.
So one of the experiences that I've had is that a lot of maintainers don't watch security talks and don't watch, right? They don't watch content like this. And so a lot of the time I've reported security vulnerabilities across open source, and you say hey, you probably should get a CV number for this, or hey, you should open a GitHub security advisory for this, or hey, yada, yada, yada. And there's a lot of, what? So what do you think the best way to educate besides doing this work, but again, they don't watch these talks, how can GitHub help assist education in helping maintainers understand the disclosure process and how that process works for their vulnerability, especially if a vulnerability or something like that has become something they're now aware of. Like, how can we enable them to understand what they need, what their part is in that?
Madison.
I was going to say, I think evangelizing it where they are, where maintainers are, where developers are, making this information easily accessible, freely accessible. It's in the docs. We're going to be talking about this forever. I'm going to be evangelizing this forever. I love this feature. And I think there's a lot of really positive incentive for maintainers to want to turn this on. The information will go directly to them. It takes out any other potential third parties. It makes it easier for researchers. They'll be able to hopefully respond faster. It'll lead to better communication, better information, ideally a more polished final product with great vulnerability information that could result in alerting their users more easily, especially if they're using the GitHub platform. So I'm personally involved in a number of best practices too about this for maintainers, for reporters. I've been involved in like so many coordinated vulnerability disclosures, best practices. My background was working on the CERT coordination team, coordinating vulnerabilities on an international scale. So I am personally really passionate about this. So I think sharing this information where maintainers are on GitHub, at maintainer conferences, at developer conferences, anywhere they are, if we can share this information and make it as obvious as possible and it is easy for them to make use of it, I think it'll increase the likelihood.
Yeah. And I have to give marketing an opportunity here. Usually it's like product marketing manager when I introduce myself, but this is an opportunity for everyone who's participating in the public beta to help us give some examples of success stories. Because if it's coming from a company, from a name, from a marketing, from whatever type of ad, it doesn't have the same kind of credibility as if it's coming from a real person and a real voice. This is the way that it used to be, and this is how it's working now. And so that's why the people who are participating here and who've learned about private vulnerability disclosure, when you have some success, we would love to share that success with you and help others learn how they can do it for themselves too.
And similar to what Kate said earlier too, like we want to hear all of the feedback. Successes definitely, but any troubles, any conflicts, anything that can be better, because by no means is this done. And reporting is just a small part of the disclosure process, which is, as much as we would love to automate this and throw as much tech in it as possible, this really is a human-based process. So we want all of the feedback.
And if evangelizing doesn't work, they're going to force enable the feature in all the users.
That was not a statement made by GitHub.
Yeah, I will say as well that like even just having the feature on, like things about like CVEs and disclosure, just by forcing everyone who has it turned on into the GitHub like GHSA like process, at the bottom of the screen there's a giant request CVE button, and then once you've clicked that, there's a disclose button. So like it'll guide maintainers who may not be too familiar with it, but they turn this on. Like it's literally step by step, button by button through what you'd expect. CVE, disclose, and like it's pretty straightforward if I'm being honest. It's a great interface.
Thanks.
Any more questions here?
Hi,
Yes,
Munawar Hafiz, Open Refactory. We are working with OpenSSF on an ambitious project to actually scan all the repositories in the PyPy repository, all the libraries in that, all 350,000 of them, and then reporting those vulnerabilities at scale to the maintainers. So Jonathan also is working on similar stuff, but he's working on specific vulnerabilities that are across multiple repositories. We're working on different vulnerabilities that can be on different repositories and reporting them. And so I was speaking with Madison yesterday about when would we can build a bot to actually do these reportings. And then the other thing is, when do we actually ask the maintainer, enforce the maintainers to turn this thing on by default? So both of them are important, like enforcing them so that it's turned by default, and then doing that with a bot. Thank you.
Yes, so we'd love a world where this is turned on for every single repository. We cannot force that on maintainers. There's a lot of maintainers with very different needs. It's a big place, technology. And so there's a lot of, there's teeny tiny projects who would, who would have very few vulnerabilities, and there's huge, massive projects who already have like huge, massive flows for how they manage vulnerabilities. So given the great diversity and breadth of like types of organizations we serve at GitHub, we can't solve the problem for everybody. So we can't flip this on for everybody and enable it in a forceful manner. However, we're gonna do our darndest to market the heck out of this, as we've said a few times. And how many repos did we think? The 24 million repos on GitHub?
That's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah. So
28 million.
Right, yeah. We've got this enabled on about 2,000 as of today. There was a big spike after we announced it yesterday, so that's awesome. We've got 24 million minus 2,000 to go to convince people to turn this on and make sure it meets their needs, and that will happen over time.
Two questions actually, coming from industry, not from the testing side or the maintainer side. But Paolo, you mentioned about a third-party validation service. Could the GitHub security team be that third-party validation service? When we talk about private, right? Again, coming from the industry side, is there any feedback into the GitHub security team to perhaps investigate, use that as a new threat feed?
Not today, but I actually think Madison has some thoughts on this.
I do. I do. So we have a curation team here at GitHub who works on our advisory database. So when a maintainer publishes a GitHub security advisory, that feed does come to my team. Actual human beings review this information, and the same with the CVE requests that we receive through the GHSA feature. All of that is reviewed by a team of security analysts here at GitHub. When it is within scope for the ecosystems that we support, because unfortunately we can't support anything, again, this is a very human-based process, we can include it in our database and generate dependabot alerts, which is wonderful. So that, in my opinion, is a huge incentive for maintainers to turn on this feature and make use of it. It's a great way, given a number of factors, that we can reach users for this. So GitHub plays a sort of role currently in the way that we're doing that. We've discussed how we can help this moving forward too. So we have a number of ideas in places that we can probably improve, because again, this is a public beta. But I think there's a lot of room where we can help and do a lot of good. So my background is from a neutral third party that did exactly this. So I'm personally very passionate about it, and I think it's a place that we could have some good, but we're not there yet.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Okay, sorry. And then also coming from Caterpillar, as we move into the enterprise model as opposed to the open source model, is this a feature that will be rolled out to enterprise cloud and that sort of thing, so that we could use it internally as a private disclosure amongst our own teams?
Would love to talk to you about that. Let's get on the phone, let's have a conversation, and I want to understand more about the user needs that you have there.
Hey, thanks for doing this, guys. I appreciate it. As a maintainer of several open source projects, but also as a long-term researcher, I've seen this from both sides. And the reality is that I think that this program is a great program, but I've been creating GitHub issues for problems that I find in people's repositories for years, yonks, and they ignore them, right? And they just delete them. And I hope that with this, and you're right, if they turn it on, that's great, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do the right thing. So I live in Australia now, and I don't know if anybody's heard about this little breach that we had in Australia, the Optus breach, but I can tell you that event has changed us culturally in Australia, so we give a crap now about APIs and endpoints. And so my point in bringing this up is to say, forcing the industry, forcing developers, pushing them a little bit outside of their comfort zone can be very productive, and I guess I'll leave it at that. It's an observation, less as a question. But a suggestion: sponsorship for repos as a way to incentivize people to do those bug bounties, right? Mm-hmm. Sponsorship. You're shaking your head. You've already thought of it. Hey.
I've had this conversation once or twice.
Good idea.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Do y'all have any like forward thoughts on moderation of reports. I've had to hire essentially triage teams to manage report coming in because essentially we don't have time to triage them ourselves, and a lot of them don't have signal. And so I imagine at the beginning this won't be a problem because there's no money involved, but as this grows, do you have like moderation thoughts or anything like that?
I sense a theme in the feedback, y'all.
I'm sorry.
I think I feel bad. I'm going to say the same thing again. But again, we're launching this MVP. Right now, it's all free, so there probably won't be reports that require too much triage or moderation. It's people reporting. Jonathan's laughing. We're launching this MVP. We know there's a long way to go. That'd be so cool in the future. Very forward thinking, and we'll continue to hack on this and make it better.
All right, so for those people who are here and streaming this talk and they're maintainers, how do they get started with this? Where do they go?
Great question. So if you are the admin of a repository that you would like to enable private vulnerability reporting on, and a whole lot of people in this crowd really want you to do that, please go to the settings of your repository. Click Code Security and Analysis on the left-hand sidebar, and then it's like the first option. So you just have to click Enable, and it's on. So repo settings, Code Security and Analysis, first option, click Enable.
There's not an org level setting?
Great feedback, Jonathan. Jonathan is asking for an org level setting. Would love to see that as well.
I clicked that button 72 times.